I talked of legitimation by subsequent marriage, which obtained in the Roman law and still obtain in the law of Scotland. Johnson said, I think a bad thing, because the chastity of women being of the utmost importance, as all property depends upon it, they who forfeit it should not have any possibility of being restored to good character, nor should the children, by an illicit connection, attain the full rights of lawful children by the posterior consent of the offending parties. His opinion upon this subject deserves consideration. Upon his principle, there may at times be a hardship and seemingly a strange one upon individuals, but the general good of society is better secured, and after all it is unreasonable in an individual to repine that he has not the advantage of a state which is made different from his own by the social institution under which he is born. A woman does not complain that her brother, who is younger than her, gets their common father's estate, although maybe they should. Why, then, should a natural son complain that a younger brother, by the same parents lawfully begotten, gets it? The operation of law is similar in both cases. Besides, an illegitimate son, who has a younger legitimate brother by the same father and mother, has no stronger claim to the father's estate than if that legitimate brother had only the same father from whom alone the estate descends. Side note here, go ahead and read a Wikipedia article on Boswell and his little infidelities, and then reread this section maybe. Anyway, Mr. Lloyd joined us in the street. In a little while we met friend Hector, as Mr. Lloyd called him. It gave me pleasure to observe the joy which Johnson and he expressed on seeing each other again. Mr. Lloyd and I left them together, while he obligingly showed me some of the manufacturers of this very curious assemblage of artificers. We all met at dinner at Mr. Lloyd's, where we were entertained with great hospitality. Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd had been married the same year with their majesties, and, like them, had been blessed with a numerous family of fine children, their numbers being exactly the same. Johnson said, Marriage is the best state for men in general, and every man is a worse man in proportion as he is unfit for the married state. I have always loved the simplicity of manners and the spiritual mindedness of the Quakers. And talking with Mr. Lloyd, I observed that the essential part of religion was piety, a devout intercourse with the divinity, and that many a man was a Quaker without knowing it. As Dr. Johnson had said to me in the morning, while we walked together, that he liked individuals among the Quakers, but not the sect. When we were at Mr. Lloyd's, I kept clear of introducing any question concerning the peculiarities of their faith. But I always asked to look at Baskerville's edition of Berkeley's Apology. Johnson laid hold of it. Did I read that right? Let me read that again. But I, having asked to look at Baskerville's edition of Berkeley's Apology, Johnson laid hold of it. And the chapter on baptism happened to open, Johnson remarked. He says there is neither precept nor practice for baptism in the Scriptures. That is false. Here he was the aggressor, by no means in a gentle manner, and the good Quakers had the advantage of him, for he had read negligently, and had not observed that Berkeley speaks of infant baptism, which they calmly made him perceive. Mr. Lloyd, however, was in a great mistake, for when insisting that the rite of baptism by water was to cease when the spiritual administration of Christ began, he maintained that John the Baptist said, My baptism shall decrease, but his shall increase, whereas the words are, He must increase, but I must decrease. John chapter 3, line 30, I believe. That's what it says down here. One of them having objected to the observance of days and months and years, Johnson answered, The Church does not superstitiously observe days merely as days, but as memorials of important facts. Christmas might be kept as well upon one day of the year as another, but there should be a stated day for commemorating the birth of our Savior, because there is danger that what may be done on any day will be neglected. Fair enough. Good answer. He said to me at another time, "Sir, the holidays observed by our church are of great use in religion. There can be no doubt of this in a limited sense. I mean, if the number of such consecrated portions of time be not too extensive. The excellent Mr. Nelson's Festivals and Fasts, which has, I understand, the greatest sale of any book ever printed in England, except the Bible, is a most valuable help to devotion. And in addition to it, I would recommend 2 sermons on the same subject by Mr. Pott, Archdeacon of St. Albans, equally distinguished for piety and elegance." I am sorry to have to say that Scotland is the only Christian country, Catholic or Protestant, where the great events of our religion are not solemnly commemorated by its ecclesiastical establishment on days set apart for that purpose. Mr. Hector was so good as to accompany me to see the great works of Mr. Bolton at a place which he called Soho, about 2 miles from Birmingham, which the very ingenious proprietor showed me himself to the best advantage. I wish that Johnson had been with us, for it was a scene which I should have been glad to contemplate by his light. The vastness and the contrivance of some of the machinery would have matched his mighty mind. I shall never forget Mr. Bolton's expression to me, quote, "I sell here, sir, what is the world desires to have? Power." He had about 700 people at work. I contemplate him as an iron chieftain, and he seemed to be a father to his tribe. One of them came to him, complaining grievously of his landlord for having distrained his goods. "Your landlord is in the right, Smith," said Bolton. "But I'll tell you what. Find you a friend who will lay down 1/2 of your rent, and I'll lay down the other half, and you shall have your goods again." From Mr. Hector I now learned many particulars of Dr. Johnson's early life, which, with others that he gave me at different times since, has contributed to the formation of this work. Dr. Johnson said to me in the morning, "You will see, sir, at Mr. Hector's, his sister, Mrs. Careless, a clergyman's widow. She was the first woman with whom I was in love. It dropped out of my head imperceptibly, but she and I shall always have a kindness for each other." He laughed at the notion that a man never can be really in love but once, and considered it as a mere romantic fancy. On our return from Mr. Bolton's, Mr. Hector took me to his house, where we found Johnson sitting placidly at tea with his first love, who, though now advanced in years, was a genteel woman, very agreeable and well-bred. Johnson lamented to Mr. Hector the state of one of their schoolfellows, Mr. Charles Coggreve, a clergyman, which he thus described, quote, "He obtained, I believe, considerable preferment in Ireland, but now lives in London quite as a valedictorian." It says here, valetudinarian. "Afraid to go into any house but his own. He takes a short airing in his post-chaise every day. He has an elderly woman, whom he calls cousin, who lives with him, and jogs his elbow when his glass has stood too long empty, and encourages him in drinking, in which he is very willing to be encouraged. Not that he gets drunk, for he is a very pious man, but he is always muddy. He confesses to 1 bottle of port every day, and he probably drinks more. He is quite unsocial. His conversation is monosyllabical, and when at my last visit I asked him what o'clock it was, that signal of my departure, had so pleasing an effect on him that he sprung up to look at his watch, like a greyhound bounding at a hare." End quote. When Johnson took leave of Mr. Hector, he said, "Don't grow like Congreve, nor let me grow like him when you are near me." You'll notice I'm a little inconsistent with my quote-unquotes. Sorry for that. When he again talked of Mrs. Careless tonight, he seemed to have had his affection revived, for he said, "If I had married her, it might have been as happy for me." I said, "Pray, sir, do you not suppose that there are 50 women in the world, with any one of whom a man may be as happy as with any one woman in particular?" Johnson said, "Aye, sir, 50,000. I said, "Then, sir, you are not of opinion with some who imagine that certain men and certain women are made for each other, and that they cannot be happy if they miss their counterparts." Johnson said, "To be sure not, sir. I believe marriage would in general be as happy, and often more so, if they were all made by the Lord Chancellor, upon a due consideration of characters and circumstances, without the parties having any choice in the matter." I guess he would like eHarmony. "I wish to have stayed at Birmingham tonight, and to have talked more with Mr. Hector, but my friend was impatient to reach his native city, so we drove on the stage in the dark, and were long pensive and silent. When we came within the focus of the Lichfield lamps, 'Now,' said Johnson, 'we are getting out of a state of death.' We put up at the Three Crowns, not one of the great inns, but a good old-fashioned one, which was kept by Mr. Wilkins, and was the very next house to that in which Johnson was born and brought up, and which was still his own property." Footnote here. "I went through the house where my illustrious friend was born, with a reverence with which it doubtless will long be visited. An engraved view of it, with the adjacent buildings, is in the Gentleman's Magazine for February 1785. We had a comfortable supper, and got into high spirits. I felt all my Toryism glow in this old capital of Staffordshire. I could have offered incense genealoci to the presiding spirits of the place, and I indulged in libations of that ale which Boniface, in the Beau Stratagem, recommends with such an eloquent jollity. Next morning he introduced me to Mrs. Lucy Porter, his stepdaughter. She was now an old maid, with much simplicity of manner. She had never been in London. Her brother, a captain in the navy, had left her a fortune of £10,000, about a third of which she had laid out in building a stately house and making a handsome garden in an elevated situation in Lichfield. Johnson, when here by himself, used to live at her house. She reverenced him, and he had a parental tenderness for her. We then visited Mr. Peter Garrick, who had that morning received a letter from his brother David, announcing our coming to Lichfield. He was engaged to dinner, but asked us to tea and to sleep at his house. Johnson, however, would not quite his old acquaintance Wilkins of the Three Crowns. The family likeness of the Garricks was very striking, and Johnson thought that David's vivacity was not so peculiar to himself as was supposed. "Sir," said he, "I don't know but if Peter had cultivated all the acts of gaiety as much as David had done, he might have been as brisk and lively. Depend upon it, sir, vivacity is much an art, and depends greatly on habit." I believe there is a good deal of truth in this, notwithstanding a ludicrous story told to me by a lady abroad of a heavy German baron who had lived much with the young English at Geneva, and was ambitious to be as lively as they, with which view he, with assiduous exertion, was jumping over the tables and chairs in his long-gigs. And when the people of the house ran in and asked, with surprise, what was the matter, he answered, "She apprens..." I don't know if I can read this. It's "She apprens titifif." I'm sorry, I'm missing this. I'll spell it out for you. SH, that's one word, APPRENS, and then TETREFIF. So I don't know. That joke is lost on me. I think I'm supposed to pronounce it in a certain way I can't do. She apprens titifif. This is as good as I can get. Anyway, there's a footnote here that says the lady abroad is Isabel de Zoyland. That's going to drive me crazy, though. I'll type it in the comments. Maybe if I Google it, I'll find something, too. Anyway, we dined at our inn and had with us a Mr. Jackson, one of Johnson's schoolfellows, whom he treated with much kindness, though he seemed to be a low man, dull and untaught. He had a coarse grey coat, black waistcoat, greasy leather breeches, and a yellow, uncurled wig. And his countenance had the ruddiness which betokens one who is in no haste to leave his can. Whatever the hell that means. Leave his can is in quotes. He drank only ale. He had tried to be a cutler at Birmingham, but had not succeeded, and now he lived poorly at home, and had some shame of dressing leather in a better manner than common, to his indistinct account of which Dr. Johnson listened with patient attention, that he might assist him with his advice. Here was an instance of genuine humanity and real kindness in this great man, who had been most unjustly represented as altogether harsh and destitute of tenderness. 1,000 such instances might have been recorded in the course of his long life, though that his temper was warm and hasty and his manner often rough cannot be denied. I saw here for the first time oat ale, and oat cakes, not hard as in Scotland, but soft like a Yorkshire cake, were served at breakfast. That sounds good. It was pleasant to me to find that oats, the food of horses, were so much used as the food of the people in Dr. Johnson's own town. He expatiated in praise of Lichfield and its inhabitants, who, he said, were, quote, the most sober, decent people in England, the gentlest in proportion to their wealth, and spoke the purest English. Unquote. I doubted as to the last article of this eulogy, for they had several provincial sounds, as there, pronounced like fear. That's how I pronounce it. Instead of like fair. So, okay, there, fair, fear. Okay, that, so, thar, fair. So I guess Boswell pronounces there, like that. I don't know. Once was pronounced like once, which is also how I pronounce it, instead of once. Oh, I guess I pronounce it once, or once, not once. So they pronounce it once. Johnson himself never got entirely free of these provincial accents. Garrick sometimes used to take him off, squeezing a lemon into a punch bowl with uncouth gesticulations, looking around the company and calling out, "Who's for punch?" Very little business appeared to be going forward at Lichfield. I found, however, of 2 strange manufacturers for so inland a place, sailcloth and streamers for ships, and I observed them making some saddlecloths and dressing sheepskins. But upon the whole, the busy hand of industry seemed to be quite slackened. "Surely, sir," said I, "you are an idle set of people." "Sir," said Johnson, "we are a city of philosophers. We work with our heads, and make the boobies of Birmingham work for us with their hands." There was at this time a company of players performing at Lichfield. The manager, Mr. Stanton, sent his compliments and begged leave to wait on Dr. Johnson. Johnson received him very courteously, and he drank a glass of wine with us. He was a plain, decent, well-behaved man, and expressed his gratitude to Dr. Johnson for having once got him permission from Dr. Taylor at Ashbourne to play there upon moderate terms. Garrick's name was soon introduced. Johnson said, "Garrick's conversation is gay and grotesque. It is a dish of all sorts, but all good things. There is no solid meat in it, there is a want of sentiment in it. Not but that he has sentiment sometimes, and sentiment too, very powerful and very pleasing. But it has not its full proportion in his conversation." When we were by ourselves, he told me, "40 years ago, sir, I was in love with an actress here, Mrs. Emmett, who acted Flora in Hob in the Well. What merit this lady had as an actress, or what was her figure or her manner, I have not been informed. But if we may believe Mr. Garrick, his old master's taste in theatrical merit was by no means refined. He was not an elegans formatorum spectator, a nice observer of the female form," to quote Terrace. Garrick used to tell that Johnson said of an actor who played Sir Harry Widder at Lichfield, "There is a courtly vivacity about the fellow," when in fact, according to Garrick's account, he was the most vulgar ruffian that ever went upon boards. We had promised Mr. Stanton to be at his theatre on Monday. Dr. Johnson jocularly proposed me to write a prologue for the occasion. A prologue by James Boswell, Esquire, from the Hebrides. I was really inclined to take the hint. Methought's prologue, spoken before Dr. Samuel Johnson at Lichfield 1776, would have sounded as well as prologue spoken before the Duke of York at Oxford in Charles II's time. Much might have been said of what Lichfield had done for Shakespeare by producing Johnson and Garrick, but I found he was actually averse to it. Oh, 20 minutes, huh? I was getting into it. I was reading it pretty well that time, I thought. Oh, well. What time is that? So maybe I should read it this time every day. I don't know. Anyway, till next time, bye from Boswell.